Hello, guys, how are you? This is Chris from Heal, Grow, Become, a place where your healing matters. Thank you so much for the love and the support that you've showed us. If you haven't already subscribed, please don't forget to hit the like and the subscribe button. Also, don't forget to like and share with family and friends. You might know of someone who needs to hear this word, who needs to hear this conversation. You might know of somebody who needs a lot of encouragement right now, who might be going through a lot of distress. Maybe this is a word for them. Once again, thank you so much. Today, I want to talk about some of the reasons why victims of abuse struggle to walk away from abusive relationships. There are a lot of reasons why victims of abuse struggle to walk away from relationships, but I just want to look at maybe three or so and see if we can help each other overcome and break free from the cycle of abuse in the relationships where we are stuck and we feel like there is no hope and that there is no possibility of us coming out of those places. I need you to know that there is hope and that there are too many possibilities and that there is something that you can do to overcome whatever form of abuse that you are being subjected to right now. All right. So, if you look into a lot of relationships in which there is abuse, toxicity, and dysfunction, you will probably notice that the toxic person is the one that controls the narrative in that relationship. The toxic person is the one that determines and decides what happens and what cannot happen in that relationship. And yet, the whole weight of that relationship is on the victim's shoulders. Basically, the victim has a responsibility to maintain a sense of loyalty towards the same person that's hurting them because of a lot of reasons. And some of the reasons are the ones that I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to try and address some of those reasons as to why a lot of times victims of abuse will develop, a sense of loyalty that is constantly renewed after every, episode of abuse. And I say renewed because, when one has been abused, you would think that that's an opportunity or closure for them to walk away from that relationship. And yet, you still find them, staying in that relationship. And so I'm going to address some of the reasons and what you can do to get out of that, toxic cycle. One of the biggest reasons why victims of abuse stay in toxic relationship is the shame that is associated with failed relationships. The shame that is associated with failed relationships. You will notice that a lot of victims would rather stay in a toxic relationship than walk out of that relationship because of a sense of shame and disapproval that they get from other people, most importantly, friends and family members. A lot of times we make it difficult for our loved ones to walk away from toxic relationships because we have not approved and validated their pain and experiences. And the reality of the shame, the reality of the discomfort that they will have to, sit with and address after they've walked out of the toxic relationship is what scares them, is what makes it difficult for them to make the decision to walk away because they know that they have no one else to stand with them, to validate and to acknowledge their pain. And so they'll end up choosing to stay in a toxic relationship because it's the most convenient thing to do. They don't have to, sit with a lot of discomfort and distress outside of the toxic relationship. And so you'll notice that number one, the shame that is associated with a failed relationship. And I think one of the biggest reasons around that shame is that you see conversations around failed relationships have not progressed, and by progress I mean that we have not changed our language around relationships in which we learn to validate people and to let people know that it's okay to walk away from a toxic relationship than holding on to a relationship that is damaging you, that is destroying your mental being and even spiritual being. And so these are the kind of conversations that we need to start having now in an attempt to assist our friends and our loved ones so that they can begin to feel confident enough to know that it's okay to walk away from any environment in which you're being abused. The second thing is the fear that most people have around, their abusers. If you have ever been around an abusive person, you'll probably notice that one of the things that they are good at is threatening their victims. They have a way of threatening their victims, and so most victims live with a sense of fear. They live with this fear that and a sense of uncertainty that discourages them from even considering walking away from toxic relationships, to the point where they would rather choose to be loyal towards the same person that's hurting them. And when they are choosing to be loyal, it's not because they want to love the person that's hurting them, but rather they are trying to minimize the abuse. They are trying to control the abuse. They are trying to find ways of, supplying their abuser or their perpetrator with some form of satisfaction, hoping that maybe the abuser will be lenient, or maybe that the abuser will somehow like them and not abuse them. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened, because the more you are willing as a victim to supply to your abuser, the more abuse you will suffer. And so the second reason is the fear that most victims of abuse have around walking away from the relationship, because they're too scared of their abusers, because they've been threatened and they've been told that no one is going to, accept you out there, and that if you walk away from this relationship, you are going to be all alone. And so the other fear is the fear of being alone. And so, in an attempt to not feel alone, even though they already feel alone, they would rather settle for the abusive person, because at least once in a while they get some form of attention, the hoovering and the love bombing. And so eventually they settle, and they'll find a way of romanticizing their abuse in an attempt to convince themselves that maybe it's not that bad. Number 3, the lack of support from family and friends. The lack of support from family and friends. A lot of times, victims of abuse suffer alone, and even if they make the decision to walk away from the abuse, no one is there to accept them, no one is there to support them, no one is there to tell them that it's okay and to help them redefine themselves. And so eventually, most victims of abuse will choose to stay, because they know that going out there, it's going to be a very lonely journey. It's going to be an even more overwhelming situation, because it feels like you have become a burden to the people that you were expecting to support you. And so eventually the alternative is to just stay in a toxic relationship. Most victims of abuse are stuck in toxic relationships because friends and relatives could not support them, could not validate them, could not tell them that it's okay and that, you need to get out of this relationship. And if you're a victim of abuse, this is something that you can do. Number 1, do not wait for other people to validate your experiences. Do not wait for people to offer you support, in as much as support is necessary. Or maybe what you need to do is to identify with strangers that are willing to support you, because your safety is more important than the support and the validation that you're waiting for from friends and relatives. If you're not getting that from friends and relatives, you need to be the first person that is going to validate your own pain, that is going to show up for you and tell yourself that, it's okay. You need to do that so that you can give yourself permission to begin to identify with a safe place. The most important thing that every victim of abuse needs is safety before they can find anything else. Before you can even consider legal action, before you can even consider a divorce, filing for the actual divorce, the first and most important thing is to secure a place in which you are safe. Then from there you can begin to consider what you want to do moving forward. But until you have managed to find a safe place to be, it's very difficult for you to consider the things that you can do to protect yourself. And even if you were to try and consider those things, you will notice that the fact that you are still in the same environment in which you are being abused, it can be very difficult for you to believe in the things and the ideas that you're generating in an attempt to walk away from an abusive relationship. And so you need to make sure that you find a safe place for yourself to be. And you have to do that in the absence of support, in the absence of validation. You don't need to wait for people to support you. Find a way of doing that. And for a lot of people, they might say, but I don't know how to do it because I don't have a place to go. And I believe it can be very true, in certain circumstances, which is why you have a responsibility to take the time to secretly begin to identify with people that are willing to help you. Begin to form new relationships with people. Begin to identify with organizations that are willing to assist you. Begin to identify with anybody, anything that will help you break free from the toxic cycle that you're trapped in. It might take you some time, but the fact that you have started on the process, at least you live with some hope. At least you live with some certainty that eventually you will come out of that situation. Thank you very much once again for being a part of this podcast. I pray this is helpful to you and anybody else out there who might need to hear this. Once again, do not forget to like, share, and subscribe. May God bless you. And I'll see you in our next episode. Thank you very much.